Hi everybody, so I've been asked a lot to do a tutorial on how I got this realistic looking leather made from cheap EVA foam. And you know, it's not perfect, but I think it looks close enough to the real thing, especially for being as cost efficient as this was, because the real leather can get kind of expensive after a while. But I got asked about the technique that I used to achieve this, so I'll be doing some foam strips here for you, just so you can see how I kind of did it and maybe make some for yourself. So what I have here is a piece of 2mm craft foam, and I bought the yellow because this is important, and I discovered this technique quite by accident. I kind of messed up and I went a little heavier with the paint than I intended to, and as I was wiping it away, I noticed that it started to do the fade along the edges and give that really realistic texture to this, or a realistic color fade to this leather. So foam leather, fleather? We'll go with that, fleather. We're gonna call it fleather. Okay, so I discovered this technique by using the yellow 2mm foam. Of course you could paint it or do whatever you needed to do, but for the purposes of the tutorial, I will be using the yellow. So I made these strips to go along with the armor that I had made, and these will be going around the wrists for the bracers, but I have these larger pieces here, the bracers that go on the shins, so I'm going to need a larger piece that fits around around the ankle will be fine, but around the calf is going to be where I'm gonna need to expand this quite a bit. So I needed some longer strips because this one isn't gonna cut it. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we do to get that texture into the leather that gives it that realistic deep spaces like the divots, we're gonna heat up the foam with a heat gun. You can use a hair dryer, or you could even use an iron to do it. You just take this piece of tin foil, and you don't want to crumple it up too much because you want a little bit of variety to the texture. So you crumple it up and make it into kind of like a stamp that's going to go underneath my hand. But like I said, if you don't have a heat gun, you can use a hair dryer, or you can just flatten the sheet of aluminum out and then run over it with an iron, as long as there's something in between the foam and the iron, because it will melt to the iron and stick to it. So I'm gonna use a heat gun. You don't want to hold in one spot too long because you don't want to melt the foam. You just want to get it warm enough that it's going to pick up that texture. And just smush the foil all over to get that texture in there. I don't want to go too heavy with it because I still want a little bit of variety, but I don't know if you can see that on the camera. Yes, okay. So yeah, you've got that variance in there. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is paint on the foam here with some acrylic paint. Right here I've got the Liquitex Heavy Body acrylic in Burnt Umber, and I love these heavy body paints just because they go on so thick and the color is just so concentrated. I love it. So all right, so I'm taking an old chip brush here. Just got the paint on the brush, and no dilution or anything, just spread it right on there. You need a nice thick layer for this bottom layer here, because we just want this paint to sink into all these texture crevices we put in here. Make sure you get a full coverage layer here. Okay, while the acrylic paint is still wet, you just take a dry paper towel and you rub most of it off. And you try and make it as even as possible. I dug a little too deep there in the middle, so I'm gonna try and even it out here. And or just fold up the paper towel and make sure it's all even there in the middle. And you just kind of brush the layers off. And then take and press the middle of the paper towel with your finger. Don't press directly onto the foam, press right next to it so you can feel the edge of the foam slide against your finger. And that will take off that outer layer and give it that kind of fade. I took off a little bit too much right there. And I'm gonna do the same thing again, except for this time I'm gonna really concentrate on these edges here so that they don't show through. So just gonna, oops. Make sure I get the edges. And I'm doing this while the paint is still wet because I want them to smear. I want this to look as realistically organic as possible. All right, and now my edges have disappeared again. The cool text or the cool color fade in there that I want. So as the paint dries, you're gonna have to press a little harder to get that desired look there. Okay, so I've got my really watered down same color here, and I'm just gonna lightly brush it over the top of the feather here. And then I take a piece of a sponge, you can use a sponge brush or even a paper towel, just start dabbing some of this paint up. And that'll give it a different color. Just gonna take a paper towel and kind of lightly get some of this off of here. And I'm sure there's a million different ways out there that you could do this, but I'm just showing you my technique. And there's a lot of good resources nowadays, so. Just a little bit more off here. And then I want to go in and grab my edges again. That paper towel is actually working out really well, so I think I'll be using that. All right, and we're gonna wait a few minutes and let that dry, and I'll meet you back here. All right, so the next thing we're gonna wanna do, if you are gonna be able to see the back of it, you're gonna wanna do something with the back here. Maybe just brush over like a thin layer. What I did for these ones is I brushed over a very thin layer of that watered down stuff, and it almost looks like the back of leather. It actually looks pretty realistic. And then it's stuck to the paper, of course, so. All right, so here's one that's already dry. I did this one last night, but I wanted to have one that was already dry so I could get right into showing you how to paint or to seal it. So right here I've got some matte Mod Podge, and the reason I like the Mod Podge is because it leaves this cool, when you bend foam that's sealed with Mod Podge, it leaves these creases in here, which ordinarily isn't desirable, but I think it really makes it look more like realistic leather. I really, really like this. So I'm using the matte Mod Podge, and what I've done is I've dumped a little bit on this plate here, and then I've mixed it with some water, so it's super, super runny. And oh, there would be a cat hair. Now, the cat hair is very, very important. Make sure you don't forget the cat hair, because if you do, the whole project is just ruined. So the cat hair, super important. Anyway, seriously, don't use cat hair, whatever. Anyway, I'm gonna seal this up here, and I've got a sponge brush, and the reason I use the sponge brush is because I want to avoid the brush strokes, and it's the same for why I water it down, because when it's watered down, it doesn't retain those lines like it would if you used a really thick or just undiluted Mod Podge or using a bristle brush. So, well, this brush is calling me a liar. It's leaving some thick streaks here. And I tried it a couple of times because I was impatient and I wanted it to dry a lot faster. But when I use the heat gun to dry it, it completely takes out all that texture that we put in there with the foil. So don't do that. Don't be like me. Be patient. Just wait for it to dry. All right, so I've got my foam leather here all dried up. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add on the edges here to make it look like the real leather. Now you can't put a back stitch on here, so you're gonna have to hold it for the first few stitches so it doesn't go anywhere. So I'll just put a couple stitches in here. And I'm going for a 1/4 inch seam right here. A little bit too close to the edge there, but then you just rotate and turn it with the needle down. And right up to the edge here. Again, rotate it. Slipped away from me there. Okay. And then actually, so what I do is I get this loop here and just pull on the loop to get the ends to come in the back side. If I can get it here. There we go. So there's one loop, and then grab the other loop here. And actually, since it's coming through on this side, no, because I sewed through, it's gonna show the yellow through. All right, and so then what I do is I just twist it up until the ends are all together. There we go. And once the ends are all together, just take your hot glue gun, put a little dab of glue right there. And then once that dries, snip off the edges, and then you're good to go. All right, everybody, thanks for watching, and give me a like, subscribe, comment, you know, all that stuff. Thanks a lot.